For a lot of people, and I know myself included, you're constantly having to deal with negative people, people who make you feel bad. And a lot of the times, these people aren't your enemies, they're actually your friends. And so in this video, I'm going to talk about, in my opinion, the 3 laws of negative people, and you can understand people who actually wish to enslave you, wish to do you wrong, even if they, on the surface, don't present themselves that way. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about negative people first, and then I'm going to go into what is, in my opinion, the 3 laws of how these people work. And if you're someone who's struggling with people, constantly putting you down, you don't know why people are kind of disrespectful to you, you haven't done anything wrong and they claim that you started it, things like that. There is a few very clear reasons for that, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. So if that is you, definitely hit the subscribe button and let's go. So what is the goal of negative people? The goal of negative people, in my opinion, is enslavement, and that's not an exaggeration. I think their goal is to basically control what you do, and I'll explain why. So negative people do things like be disrespectful, encourage bad habits, ostracization. That's kind of like kicking out of the group, like doing things like, deliberately not inviting you to something and sending you pictures, or a few other examples might be removing you from a group call and not adding you back when everyone's there. Just like little disrespectful things like that where they exclude you. And then emotional warfare. So deliberately doing things to try and make you emotional. And another interesting thing to mention here is that oftentimes the people who do this, they're not clearly your enemy. They're not someone that you actively despise. Some of the time, in fact, maybe even most of the time, the people who are doing this are actually your friends. They are in your circle. They participate in things you do. And they still do these things to you. And that can be kind of, it's kind of weird because they would claim to be your friends, but they treat you almost like an enemy would treat you. And this, I know, is something I've personally struggled with, and I know a lot of people have struggled with. And it's difficult to understand. If you're a person who is largely good, and no one's perfect, but if you're largely a nice person, you don't treat people like this, it can be difficult to understand why someone who claims to be your friend does these things. But the reason is actually quite simple, and once you watch this video, you'll probably never have to watch a video again like this. But it's generally because of envy. So envy is a sin. It basically means jealousy, but it's more complex than just jealousy. It can be to do with feeling threatened or insecure by that person. So if you, and we will go more into this, but if you excel at something, particularly if you excel at a lot of things that person doesn't, and they're insecure about that, they can try and tear you down. There's a thing called tall poppy syndrome, which is kind of like, if a poppy is a flower, if you didn't know, if it grows taller than all the rest of them, oftentimes it can be, it'll be picked out by predators because it stands out from the rest. And so poppies generally grow in line with each other. Otherwise they will, be pulled out. I'm not sure if that's 100% true, but that's how the saying goes. So yeah, that's another thing. If you seem to, excel, some people it's in their nature to tear you down. And another one is just emotional weakness. Another reason why someone might try and, tear you down and be disrespectful is simply because they are emotionally weak and they need to like drain other people to make themselves feel good. And once we go into, I think it's law number 3 of this video, you'll understand a little bit more about emotional weakness. But ultimately, the goal of these people, no matter what their motivation is to control you so they can stop you from growing. They're trying to hold you at like the level you are at now, or make you even worse, because they're effectively insecure. So if they can emotionally control you, if they can, a lot of the times these people disrespect you for doing things that are actually good. Like if you start going to the gym, they'll like make fun of you for that. That just doesn't make any sense to me, but people literally do that. And they do that, it doesn't make sense until you understand the reason they're doing that is to try and stop you from growing, because they're already insecure and the fact that you're growing is upsetting them. Again, we'll talk about that more in law number 3. But if you want to understand why people are like this, even when you've done absolutely nothing wrong, and sometimes they'll say, oh, you started it when you've literally done nothing, this video is for you. So without further ado, let's get into law number 1, the law of the 2 strings. This is a really interesting story that I wish more people knew about, because my dad told me it when I was little. But the story basically goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a big string and a little string, and the big string was really cool and popular and good at things, and the little string wasn't as good, and it really, really wanted to be like the big string. It wanted to be impressive and cool and good at things, and people would like it because it would be nice and big, but it wasn't big, it was little. And so the little string basically had 2 options. It could grow by befriending the big string and becoming more like the big string, and eventually it would grow and grow until it was also big like the big string and it was well liked as well. Or it could not do that, and it could instead cut the big string in half. And that way it wouldn't grow at all, but it would now be maybe a slightly bigger string simply because it's cut the other string in half. And the moral of this story is that you always have two options in life. When you see someone that is maybe good at something you're not, you can either try and become better if you want to become better at it. If you're completely apathetic towards it, then I guess this story doesn't apply. But if you see someone who's good at something and you want to be more like them, you can either grow to become better at that thing, which would be in real life friendship and mutual growth and, you know, having a wholesome friendship together, or you could cut them in half, which is basically what negative people do. And unfortunately, a lot of people are very negative these days for reasons I'll talk about in a second. But cutting in half is basically disrespect, rude comments, anything with bad intentions. I think that's a really interesting thing I've written down, because a lot of the time, you don't actually think about the intention of what someone's doing. If someone makes a joke, for example, I put jokes in quotation marks, and the joke is putting you down. Obviously, not all jokes that put someone down are coming from a place of insecurity. They can literally just be a silly joke. But if there's someone in your life, and someone probably just popped into your head just then, who consistently says that they're making jokes, but they're literally just being rude, and they make you feel bad, and you can clearly think about the stuff this person does. Do you honestly think their intention is to be funny, or can you see that their intention is to put you down? Because often people like this aren't very subtle. If you can see their intention is actually to make you feel bad, you've done nothing wrong. They're not jokes. Their person is pretending they're jokes, and they're actually trying to make you feel worse because they're insecure. That is their intention. So intention is a really, really important thing of someone. Next, every time from now on someone does something like this that you think is kind of, oh, they're a bit of a negative person, think about their intention, because people are actually easier to read than you would think, particularly negative people like this. They're very easy to read, and if you can have a look at them, look them in the eye when they're saying stuff, and you can see that they're waiting for a reaction, they're trying to make you angry, and maybe if you don't give them a reaction, they get a little bit upset themselves, like they get a bit annoyed. You can clearly see that that's the intention of this kind of person. And it goes back to what we said before about motive, where they're envious of you, they feel threatened, and so they try and cut you down. And unfortunately, the type of person who would cut someone down, I think, is only growing more common these days, with people having, less confidence, more insecurity, less success to build their own confidence off, because people are just, wasting time and more unhealthy. And so there's a lot more people, I think, that actually want to cut someone down rather than grow. So you will be encountering a lot of these people, even in your friend group, which is a frustrating thing. But what is the solution to this? Well, the solution is actually pretty simple. It's just to understand that attacks come from below, not above. Nobody that's above someone really is disrespectful to someone below someone in an area that they're good at to try and put them down. It does happen, but it's very rare. Someone would have to be good at something but also incredibly insecure to put someone else down. Generally, when someone does this kind of thing, it's because they are the little string and they're below you, and they're trying to cut you down because they don't like people being above them. They need everyone to be in a constant state of submission and unhappiness for them to feel good, and that's because they're a broken person, effectively. And the reason you can't understand these people is simply because you're not like them. And once you understand what I just said, which is that attacks come from below because they're trying to cut you in half, it becomes a lot more easy to understand. But I still think you never truly understand it, simply because you're just not these people. But anyway, we'll move on to law number 2. So law number 2 is the law of negative praise. And I think this is a really good one for how to deal with people's negative comments, because a lot of the time, even if you understand, okay, this person's insecure and they're saying things to try and make me, to try and tear me down, it's still difficult sometimes to cope with what they're saying, because it's just frustrating to listen to someone constantly being rude to you. So here is something that I learned from a really good YouTube video. It's actually a YouTube short. It's one of the best YouTube shorts I've ever watched, because most of them are garbage, but this one taught me this. So basically, if a positive person, someone who's a good person, is giving you a compliment, then that's a good thing. A positive times a positive in mathematics is a positive. So obviously that would be a good thing. If someone you trust and care about and they're a good person expresses a negative thing about you, like maybe they tell you, I didn't like this one thing you did, then you should at least consider them, and perhaps you should actually, that might be a negative thing about you. You should probably listen and then maybe work on yourself, because maybe you have done something wrong. Maybe you haven't and they're wrong, but you should at least hear them out, which is why I put a negative. It's something to consider. However, if a negative person, someone you know is envious and weak and they need to cut people down, says something bad about you, that's a double negative. For anyone who's done math, you know that a negative times a negative is a positive. So if a negative person says something bad about you, why on earth would a negative times a negative equal a negative? Why on earth should you take into consideration and affect something that a bad person has said, a bad thing a bad person has said about you? Why would that possibly be bad? We all know a negative times a negative is a positive. And so if a disrespectful, envious person says something disrespectful about you, that's a positive. That's a sign that they view you in a position of superiority compared to them, and they're actually insecure about where they are, and so they feel the need to tear you down. That is actually praise. When a negative person makes a negative comment about you, that isn't a negative thing about you. That's praise, because a negative times a negative is a positive. If you're being disrespected by disrespectful, envious people, that's not bullying. That's not rudeness. That's a standing ovation in disguise. That is a standing ovation because people who are weak are all effectively agreeing that you're in a position of superiority and they're insecure, and the only thing they can do is tear you down. Because if they weren't those people, if they were this person up the top, the positive person, they would compliment you and they would actually learn from you and grow with you, and you would learn from them as well, presumably. But this is a very, very good lesson to learn. You need to actually attach some dopamine to this, because so many people get so frustrated and kind of emotional when someone they don't like says something bad about them, and that's because you place way too much value on what this person says. You're placing value on what someone you don't like says about you. So what you need to do from now on is actually attach some dopamine to it. When someone that you don't like says something bad about you, I want you to actually give yourself a dopamine spike. You actually get happiness from someone saying that, because that's an indication that you're going in the right direction. If someone is making disrespectful comments to you and they're disrespectful, they're effectively telling you that you are going in a direction they don't like, which is of course the right direction to go in, because that's the right thing that you should be doing. They're trying to hold you back. So attach some dopamine to it. Feel happy when someone disrespectful says something disrespectful to you, because that is a sign that they're actually intimidated by you and that you're going in the right direction. So that's the law of negative praise. Now on to number 3, which is I think the most important law, and it gives the greatest insight into how people work. If you've ever wondered, I've spelled every, oh my God. If you've ever wondered why people treat you badly when you've done nothing wrong, this is a personal, I'll give you a personal story real quick. I remember one time, this was years ago when I was in high school, and I was in class with 2 friends. One of my friends he was all right. He was just a normal friend. And the other friend was, shall we say, a bit of a dickhead. He was one of the friends who tears people down. He didn't just do it to me, he did it to a lot of people, but I was in a fair few of his classes, so he would do it to me quite often. And he did actually annoy me a fair few times, but this time, I think, really, it kind of got to me a bit and it confused me as to why he did this at all. And on looking back, I now understand the reason he did this. Effectively, in class, he just started being disrespectful and making jokes about how I like saying I think I'm better than anyone, things like that. And it really got to me, because it was like, we're sitting here, I've said absolutely nothing to you, and you've just started being rude. And so I basically said that to him. I said, why are you doing this? Like, literally, what have I done to annoy you? You're starting this, and something like that along those lines. Except it made sense in the moment. I'm just kind of paraphrasing it now. And he said, oh, but this is your home screen. I think I had it on my home screen. I had like a wallpaper from like, it might have been a Batman wallpaper. It didn't even matter. It was inconsequential. And he said to me that was his reason, because I had that because I thought I was arrogant, something like that. And that obviously doesn't make any sense at all. That sounds like I've mis-explained the story. I haven't. That's literally what happened. And it sounds like, that doesn't even make sense, because it doesn't make sense. You wouldn't start, being rude to someone because of their wallpaper and saying, a picture of like, Batman or whatever makes them insecure. But unfortunately, what I've realized later on is that wasn't actually the logical reason. The reason people like him do things they do isn't based on logic, it's based on emotion. If they feel that they're in a position of inferiority, they will tear you down. And of course, when you ask them for a reason, they can't just say, oh, I emotionally feel insecure around you. They have to come up with some rubbish. And so that kind of expression that his reason that he gave was an expression of emotion, And kind of, it really demonstrated to me, in hindsight, I can look back and see that's a very, very clear indication that what he's doing is purely based in emotion, and I haven't actually really done anything wrong. It's just him kind of having to come up with some nonsense reason for why he's doing what he does. So now that I've kind of explained why people treat you badly, even when you've done nothing wrong, let's talk about weakness. And this is a really important thing, because if you make someone feel insecure who's a negative person, they will do this to you. And you probably think, well, I don't make anyone feel insecure. I'm just me. Like, I'm not perfect, but I do my best. I try and, exercise or whatever you're trying to do to improve as a person. What could I possibly be doing that makes someone insecure? Here's why. The weakness of successful people, and successful is probably the wrong word. In hindsight, I would have changed it to people that are making progress in their lives. So good people. The weakness of these people is comfort, distraction, and fear. That's probably you if you're watching a video like this. Your weaknesses are comfort, getting too comfortable and not working on the things that are actually good for you, getting distracted, and then maybe being afraid to pursue your goals. Those are your weaknesses. The weaknesses of negative people, the kind of people we've talked about in this video, are accountability, discipline, and comparison. Accountability, because if they're held accountable, if they're basically blamed for their own current state, they can't really comprehend the fact that they're responsible for the complete, lack of fulfillment they have in their own life. They don't have any discipline at all. They basically just indulge, and anyone who doesn't do that, they have to tear down, because they have to make everyone on their level. And comparison as well is a big one, because if they're around you as a negative person, they're obviously going to be comparing themselves to you, and that kind of leads to insecurity. Here's the big difference between these two types of people, and obviously they have different weaknesses, but there's actually one key difference between them, which is how their weaknesses are actually activated. And this sounds kind of silly and over analyzing, but I'll explain it really quickly. The only way a successful person can have their weakness used against them is if they give permission for it. You can't be too comfortable to work. You can't be distracted from work. You can't be afraid to do the thing you should work on unless you actually give into it. You actually have to give permission to do that. So the best that a negative person can do is tear you down with words. They can try and, say what you're doing is cringe, or they can say, do this instead. They can try and encourage you to do bad habits, but they don't actually have your weakness. The best they can do is convince you to use your weakness on yourself. That is literally the best they can do. You understand me? But it's different the other way around, because the negative person's weaknesses, accountability, discipline, and comparison are not the same. They're not something that you would convince them to do. You would never convince someone to compare themselves to you, or you would never convince someone to show no discipline or to, do any of those things. Those weaknesses are activated via your proximity. So it's not because where the difference is where they're telling you to try and do these things because they can't actually make you do these things. You bring out these things by just being around them. You bring out their weaknesses by just being around them. When you're around a negative person and you show that you're capable of doing things that they wish they were better at, you hold them accountable because you show that these things are actually possible and achievable, and that makes them insecure. It goes into discipline as well. If they're around you and they can see that you're a disciplined person, that makes them insecure because they can see that someone is doing the things that they don't do and they don't like that. And then of course, by you just being around them without saying anything, they compare themselves to you because that's the kind of person they are. So can you see the very clear difference in weaknesses? The best they can do is convince you. The best they can do to use your weakness against you is to convince you. Whereas when you're just around these people without even realizing it, you're actually tearing them down via proximity. And that's not a critique of you. That's not to say you're doing anything wrong, but this is why you probably don't realize why people treat you badly even when you've done nothing wrong, because you don't realize you haven't actually done anything wrong, but you don't realize the effect you're having on them. They're actually suffering when you're around, and it's not your fault. It's actually, you should continue to become a better person. But negative people actually suffer around positive people even when you're not doing anything, simply because of their own weaknesses, and you are their weakness. You being around is kind of like them being exposed to kryptonite. Think about it this way. I put it into a metaphor. When them trying to tear you down is like them offering you a box with kryptonite in it, but you need to actually unlock it yourself. They don't know that, they don't have the key to the box. You need to unlock it. Whereas you being around them is like you literally being the kryptonite, and you around them, even when you're not doing anything wrong, is actually making them suffer simply because they have a weakness to you. They are weak to the things that you do because they're a negative person. And of course they lash out. Of course they see you as the instigator. It's childish, but that's why whenever you ask someone, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but maybe just do it once screenshots to prove that this is actually right. The next time someone disrespects you, just say that they started it. Say why are you starting this? They'll give you some absolutely nonsense reason it's just silly and doesn't make sense for how you started it, and that's because it's purely emotional and because they're insecure with you around. But guys, that is the video. Hopefully you did learn something from this, because I think it's a lot of really common problems people have to deal with. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can add me on Instagram and hit the subscribe button. But that is the video. Thank you for watching, and have a good one.